Ah, you have arrived. Come in from the dark. The world outside is loud and cold, but in here you are safe. Welcome back to the Library of Whispers. Take a deep breath and let the worries of the day fall away. Listen to the sound of the old clock ticking softly and the fire crackling in the hearth. It has burned low tonight, just warm, glowing embers. We are looking for a story of impossible grandeur, a story of the gods made real. Walk with me past the shelves of sleeping histories and forgotten philosophies to the very back corner, here where the air is thick with dust and the scent of ages. Ah, yes, this is the one. It is a massive volume, bound not in leather, but in something that looks like cracked yellowed ivory. On its cover, a single lightning bolt, faded gold leaf, is embossed on the front. It is heavy as a king's throne. Let us carry it to the light of the candle and settle in. Gently, we open the cover, the ancient spine groaning in protest. The pages are stiff, and they whisper of gold and marble and devotion. Let the outside world fade as we turn to the first illustration, a place called Olympia, and the god who waited within, and then you move beyond the whispering grove, stepping out from the soft, dappled shade of the olives, and the world seems to fall away, replaced by a silence that is not empty, but full of an immense, waiting power. Before you, rising against the soft blue of the Hellenic sky, is the temple. It is a colossal shape of stillness, a monument built not just of stone, but of reverence. The sun, climbing high, strikes its vast, sloping roof, and the Parian marble tiles gleam like polished shields, so bright it almost hurts to look, a beacon of impossible purity against the green, living earth of the Altirs. The scale of it, the sheer, breathtaking scale, it seems to pull the very air towards it, a quiet vortex of devotion. The whispers of the other pilgrims, which had seemed so present among the trees, now feel distant, thin, like the rustling of dry leaves, utterly dwarfed by this new, profound presence. The temple does not make a sound, and yet its silence is the loudest thing you have ever heard. It is the silence of a mountain peak, of the ocean floor, a silence that holds within it the promise of a thunderclap. You begin to walk the sacred way, your sandals moving over stones worn smooth by 1,000 footsteps before you. The path aligns you with its perfect, harmonious center. Flanking you, rows of massive, fluted columns stand like stoic, patient giants. They are Doric, simple and powerful, their capitals unadorned, their strength absolute. They are not merely holding up a roof, They are pillars holding up the sky itself, separating the divine from the mortal. As you draw closer, you can feel the air change. The warmth of the open sanctuary gives way to a profound, living cool that radiates from the stone. It is a coolness that smells of shadow and minerals, a clean, ancient scent that seems to wash the dust of the world from your skin. You reach out a hand, your fingers tracing the deep, carved grooves of the nearest column. The marble is smooth, impossibly smooth, yet not slick. It has a fine, almost velvety texture, but beneath it is a chill that seems drawn from the very bedrock of the earth. It feels asleep, waiting. You stand in the shade of the outer colonnade, the Pteron, and the world is now a grid of blinding golden light and deep, resonant shadow. The sounds of Olympia, the distant shouts from the Palestra, the murmur of the river Cladios, the wind in the pines, are all muffled here, filtered through this forest of stone, becoming a low, gentle drone that exists somewhere far behind you. Here, the only sound is the quiet hush of the breeze as it weaves between the pillars, a long, low sigh that seems to be the temple's own slow breath. You ascend the 3 great steps of the Crepidoma, each one a deliberate, measured movement, a transition from the profane to the sacred. The top step, the stylobate, feels like a shore, the edge of a vast, quiet sea. Before you stand the enormous bronze doors of the pronaos, the entrance hall. They are open, a dark, welcoming void, beckoning you into the heart of the structure. As you cross the threshold, the change is absolute. The blinding light of the sun is instantly extinguished, replaced by a deep, sacred gloom. The air, which was cool outside, is now deeply, profoundly cold, still as a tomb, yet alive. It is heavy, thick with the scent of 1,000 years of stone, the sharp, clean tang of polished marble, and something else, a faint, almost imperceptible fragrance of high-quality cedar wood from the massive, unseen beams that span the ceiling far, far above. There is the subtle, metallic scent of bronze, lamp oil perhaps, from a distant, flickering flame, but more than anything, it is the smell of emptiness, a clean, consecrated, and utterly expectant void. Your eyes begin to adjust, and the scale of the inner chamber, the cellar, reveals itself. It is a cavern, a canyon carved from marble. 2 new rows of columns, slender and tall, march down the length of the hall, creating a central nave, drawing your gaze, drawing your very soul forward. They too disappear into the darkness above, their purpose to hold the roof so high that it seems to be a piece of the night sky itself, trapped within these walls. The floor is a dark, polished stone, reflecting the dim light like the surface of a still black lake. Your footsteps, so quiet outside, now echo, Each soft tread of your sandal is captured and amplified, blooming in the cold air, rising to the invisible ceiling and whispering back at you as if the temple itself is noticing your arrival, measuring your reverence. You walk slowly down the nave, drawn by an invisible current. The silence in here is different. It is a weighted, liquid silence. It presses against your eardrums, fills your lungs. It is the deep, abyssal quiet of anticipation. And then you see it. At the far end of the vast, dim hall, there is a space, a destination. It is a base, a throne, a pedestal of immense size, wrought of black Eleusinian stone and Parian marble, polished to a mirror sheen, but it is empty. This is the heart of the temple, and it is waiting. It is a hollow space, a defined and sacred absence. All the lines of the building, all the power of the columns, all the prayers of the pilgrims, they all converge on this one empty spot. It is a void that pulses with potential. It is the most powerful emptiness you have ever felt. The air around it seems to shimmer. There is no God here, not yet. There is only the place for the God. The temple is a perfect, magnificent, colossal vessel, a body crafted by the finest hands in all of Hellas, a palace of unimaginable beauty, waiting, longing for its soul to arrive. It is the held breath before the name of the divine is spoken. You can feel the longing in the stone itself, in the cold air that refuses to move, in the deep, resonant echoes that sound like a low, mournful hum. The entire structure, every massive column, every carved metope, every polished floor stone is focused on this single point, this aching void. It is waiting for Phidias. It is waiting for the ivory and the gold. It is waiting for the face of the Father, for the Thunderbolt, for the arrival of the divine heart that will make it whole. And until that day, it will stand here in this perfect, chilling, beautiful silence, waiting. I belong to Phidias, the simple scratched words, a mortal claim on a humble piece of clay. This cup, this small earthy thing, it is not the work of a legend. It is the possession of a man. It is a bridge warm from a hand that crosses the vast dark river of time. It whispers to us not of the divine, but of the human, of the quiet, unguarded moments behind the legend. It asks us to look past the impossible, glittering surfaces of ivory and gold, past the colossal marble figures that held the gaze of an empire, and to find the man who held this cup, who drank from it perhaps in the cold blue light of dawn, before the world awoke to demand its miracles. This cup is an invitation to know the man, not the myth, to know Phidias. We must step into the air he breathed. Let us imagine that workshop, the ergasterion, built just west of the sacred temple. Let us go there now, in our minds. The air inside is not clear. It is thick, hazy with fine silvery dust from the marble, golden motes of sawdust from the massive wooden framework, and the earthy, damp, profound smell of wet clay. There is the sharp, almost sour tang of metal, the scent of the forge from the courtyard where the bronze is being prepared, the acrid smell of glues and resins, and beneath it all, the heavier, richer scents of oil. Fragrant olive oil used to polish the ivory, and the resinous, almost smoky perfume of incense, burned not just for the gods, but to clear his mind, to consecrate the space, to chase away the smell of human sweat. The workshop is vast, high-ceilinged to accommodate the giants he is building, but it is not empty, it is cluttered. It is a place of work, a sacred chaos of plans drawn on papyrus, tools scattered on benches, and pieces of the divine. A single massive ivory finger here, a sheet of gold beaten thin as a leaf, draped over a wooden form there. The sounds are quiet, but constant. The of a fine abrasive stone, perhaps mixed with sand and water, smoothing a surface. An endless, patient sound, the soft, rhythmic tap, tap, tap of a small wooden mallet on a chisel, not the heavy, percussive blows of the quarry, but the careful, searching, gentle touches, the touch that finds a god's expression in a block of silent stone. And in the center of this quiet, sacred industry, we find the man himself. He is not a king. He is not a priest, though he is often called one. He is a craftsman. He is Phidias, son of Charmides. He wears a simple tunic, an exomis, leaving one shoulder bare for work. It is stained with pigment, smeared with wet plaster and clay. His hair is tied back, his face streaked with sweat and fine white dust, which has settled in his eyebrows and the lines around his eyes, making him look older, like a statue of himself worn by time. And then we see his hands. These are the most famous hands in all of Hellas, hands that shaped the face of Athena Parthenos in Athens, hands that are now tasked with bringing the father of all gods, Zeus himself, to earth. But look closer. They are not the delicate, perfect hands of a deity. They are human hands. They are strong, the knuckles wide, the palms thick and yellow with calluses from a lifetime of gripping the chisel, the hammer, the rasp. The skin is cracked dry from the plaster. The fingernails are broken, packed with dark clay and glittering golden dust. There are small, faded white scars from the slip of a blade, stains from pigments, black and red, from inks used to draw the endless, endless plans onto the wood and stone. These hands are tired. They are tools. They are the mortal, aching, physical bridge between an idea a divine, impossible dream, and the solid, heavy, unmoving world. These are the hands that will, at the end of the day, pick up that simple, dark cup. What must it be to be this man, to carry the weight of such a task day after day? He is not just a sculptor, he is a conduit. He is the man who Pericles, his friend, his patron, trusted to give a face to the entire Athenian age. And now, here at Olympia, he must do something even more difficult. He must build a god, not a depiction, not a symbol. He must build Zeus. He must create a form so perfect, so true, that when pilgrims stand before it, they do not see ivory, they do not see gold, they do not see the sculptor's skill, they see only the god himself. They must feel the thunder, they must feel the judgment, they must feel the mercy. How do you shape mercy from elephant tusk? How do you carve authority into a sheet of gold? This is the weight Phidias carries. It is a solitude that no one else can understand. At night he does not dream of shapes. He dreams of presence. He dreams of the awful, immense silence of the God he is trying to contain. The world sees the legend. They see the creator, the Theopoios, the God-maker. They whisper his name with the same reverence they give to the gods he sculpts. They see the genius who commands armies of artisans, who spends a king's ransom in gold and exotic materials. They see the friend of statesmen, the pinnacle of art. But that is the legend. The man. The man is something else. The man is the one who stands alone in the vast cold workshop after everyone has left, when the only light is a single flickering oil lamp. He stands staring at a half-formed hand, a hand the size of a chariot, and he feels doubt. He feels the aching in his shoulders, the strain in his lower back. He feels the chill of the night air coming through the high, unglazed windows. He is the one who rubs his temples, his mind exhausted, not from the physical labor, but from the seeing, from holding the perfect, divine image in his mind for so many hours, so many days, so many years, that his own world feels thin and grey and unreal. This is the man who owned the cup, a man who, at the end of a day spent wrestling with the divine, needed something simple, something real, something human. He needed to feel the cool, familiar curve of fired earth in his calloused, stained hand. He needed to drink water or simple watered wine, to feel the liquid cool and plain pass his lips and cut through the dust in his throat. This cup, this is his anchor. It is the proof that the man behind the legend was not a myth himself. He was flesh, he was dust, he was a heart that beat, a mind that wrestled, and a pair of tired mortal hands that reached and reached and reached until they touched the face of God. This small, dark cup is his whisper back to us. I was here, it says. I was real. The workshop of Phidias, the ergasterion. It was not just a building. It was not merely a place of dust and tools positioned conveniently to the west of the great temple. It was a secret, a trick of the eye, a feat of profound and practical magic. For Phidias, the master of feeling, knew that a god is not simply made, it must be curated. It does not exist in a void, it exists in the space that holds it, in the light that finds it, in the silence that surrounds it. And so, before the first piece of ivory was carved, before the first ounce of gold was hammered, he built a mirror. He built a room to build a god in. He ordered the construction of a workshop that was, in its very bones, a precise, one-to-one replica of the cellar of the temple itself. The same dimensions, the same vast, echoing length, the same towering height, the same orientation to the rising sun. It was a practice temple, a ghost of the naos, built of common stone and wood, but holding the exact same sacred, empty volume of air. Why would he do this? Why build a temple? To build the heart of a temple. Because Phidias was not merely sculpting a statue, he was sculpting an experience. He was crafting the very moment a pilgrim would step from the light into the darkness and have their breath stolen from them. He had to know exactly how it would feel. He had to understand the light. The temple cellar was a place of deep, consecrated gloom, the only significant light source being the two colossal bronze doors. That light was not the bright, flat, artless light of the open sky. It was a shaft of gold, moving, changing, a living presence that would enter in the morning, paint its way across the polished floor, and then soften into a diffuse blue twilight in the afternoon. Phidias built his workshop mirror to capture this exact light. He built it so he could stand in the doorway at dawn and see how the light would strike the idea of the god. He needed to see where the shadows would fall. A shadow on a 40-foot statue is not a shadow. It is a chasm, a mystery, a place for the mortal mind to fall into. He needed to know how the gold of the robes would catch that low, angled light. Would it blaze like a sudden fire, blinding the pilgrim, or would it offer a soft, warm, buttery glow, a light that seemed to come from within? He would hold up plates of polished ivory in the dimmest corners of this practice room, just to see if they would gather the faint ambient light, if they would appear to be living, breathing skin, or just cold, dead tusk. He was testing the feeling. He was choreographing the awe. And then there was the scale. in the open air, a 40-foot statue is just large, an impressive curiosity. But inside a room that is vast but still finite, a statue of that size becomes something else. It becomes overwhelming. It is not a thing you look at, it is a thing you are with. It dominates the very air you breathe. Phidias built this room so he could feel it. He could stand in the exact spot a pilgrim would stand, his sandals on the dusty floor, and he could look up and up and up. He needed to feel the way the god's presence would press down from the shadows near the ceiling. He needed to feel the impossibility of it, the way the knees of the seated god would seem to tower over him, the way the head would be lost in the gloom, forcing the eye to travel, to search, to be humbled. He built the room to test the mortal reaction, to refine the posture, the turn of the head, the gesture of the hand, until it produced not just admiration but fear, a deep, trembling, holy fear. This workshop was his laboratory of the sublime, and into this vast shadowed echo chamber came the sounds of creation. In the open air they would have been lost, carried away on the scent of the olive trees. But here, within these walls, every sound was trapped, amplified, focused. The sounds bounced off the stone, echoing just as they would in the final temple, creating a strange, sacred symphony of work. Listen, you can hear it, the sharp, high-pitched scree of a fine metal chisel as it shaves a sliver from a curved piece of ivory, a sound like a nervous bird, and beneath it, the shh of the polishers, the endless patient sound of fine sand and oil being rubbed against the vast golden plates of the god's robes, a sound like 1,000 whispers. There is the heavy, resonant thud of mallets on wood, not the sharp tap of the sculptors, but the deep structural blows of the carpenters, securing the massive, unseen wooden soul that lay beneath the precious skin. The entire statue was held on an armature, a skeleton of wood and iron, and the sounds of its assembly were the sounds of a great ship being built. The groan of ropes, the creak of enormous levers, the deep, heavy boom as a section of the framework was settled into place. And through it all, the voices. Not shouts, never shouts. This was the ergasterion of Phidias. The voices were low, measured, precise, murmurs of instruction, quiet calculations, a soft call for a different tool, a quiet word of approval from the master himself, a voice that cut through the dust and the din, a calm center to the entire swirling cosmos of creation. These were the sounds of a god being born, piece by painful, patient piece, hidden away in a room that was pretending, practicing to be its final home. It was a secret, a technique whispered among the masters, a word that felt heavy and rich on the tongue. Chryselephantine, chrysos, the Greek for gold, and elephantinos for ivory. This was not a statue of cold, lifeless marble, a single thing struck from a single block. No, this was to be a composite, a divine illusion, a being assembled. It was a technique that built a god from the inside out. At its heart, it was a creature of wood, a massive, unseen armature, a skeleton of seasoned cedar and cypress, a structural soul that would hold the impossible weight. And over this hidden core, over this strong, secret shape, a skin was laid, a skin of hammered, gleaming gold, and a skin of polished, living ivory. The gold was the garment, the light, the sun itself captured and draped. The ivory was the flesh. It was the face, the hands, the feet, the parts of the god that lived. It was chosen because, in the deep, flickering gloom of the temple, it did not reflect light like stone. It held it. It absorbed the dim, sacred light and glowed from within, possessing a soft, warm, biological luminescence that made the skin seem real. But to create this divine flesh, to work this strange and precious material, was a slow and difficult art. The tusks arrived in the workshop, huge and curved, the heavy, silent relics of behemoths from the deep, unknown lands of Libya and Ethiopia. They were not blocks of stone, uniform and predictable. They were organic. They had a grain, a life, a memory, and they had to be unmade. They had to be softened, perhaps in baths of vinegar, and then carefully, painstakingly sawn, cut into thin plates, shaved into veneers, worked with a patience that bordered on prayer. And this work, this unmaking, it filled the ergasterion with a scent that was unforgettable. It is not the clean, green smell of the olive groves outside. It is not the sweet, sharp scent of cedar wood being carved. No, this is a biological smell. When the metal rasp files down the edge of a plate, when the fine-toothed saw cuts through the dense material, when a drill bit turns to make a small hole, a dust is released, a fine, pale, silvery powder that hangs in the air like a haze. And this dust has a smell. It is the smell of tooth. It is the smell of bone. It is sharp, acrid, faintly burnt. The smell of dry calcium, the scent of a long-dead, powerful life. It coated every surface. The artisans would taste it on their lips, feel its fine grit on their skin, breathe it deep into their lungs. It was a choking, pervasive, strangely intimate scent. It was the scent of the god's skin, particle by particle, floating in the thick, hazy air of the workshop mingling with the metallic tang of the forge and the resinous perfume of the wooden armature, and the god's skin, his ivory flesh, must be clothed. The drapery, the vast flowing himation that would cover the god's form, was to be made of chrysos, of gold. But gold does not fold like fabric, it does not drape, it is heavy, stubborn, metallic. How then does one make it flow? How does one make it ripple and gather at the waist and fall over the knees in a way that suggests the massive divine form beneath it? Phidias the master knew. He was a sculptor first. He did not begin with the gold. He began, as always, with the clay. In the dusty corners of the workshop, archaeologists would one day find the broken, scattered evidence of this magic. The tools. They would find the moulds. Hundreds of them. Not delicate, small things, but large, heavy, curved sections of terracotta, of fired clay. Here was the genius. Phidias, with his own hands, sculpted the master of the robes in wet, pliable clay. He sculpted every fold, every ripple, every subtle line that would suggest a divine, muscular leg or a powerful shoulder beneath the garment. This vast clay model was then cut into sections, and from these the negative moulds were cast and fired in the kilns, their hollows holding the perfect intended shape. And then the gold beaters would do their work. They would hammer the gold into thin, pliable sheets, plates of pure, soft metal, and these sheets would be laid into the cool, earthy hollows of the terracotta moulds. They would be pressed, hammered, gently, carefully coaxed, annealed with heat and hammered again until the stubborn, shining metal learned the shape, until the gold remembered the softness of the clay, until it took on the graceful, flowing, fabric-like forms that Phidias had first dreamed in his mind. But a god is not just flesh and fabric. A god is presence, and presence is found in the details, in the spark. The work was not just gold and ivory, it was everything. The throne of the god, the sandals on his feet, the hem of his golden garment, these were not left plain. They were to be a riot of intricate whispered stories, a tapestry of inlaid materials. The workshop was filled with small chests and stone bowls holding the final precious touches. There were slivers of dark, polished ebony, chips of semi-precious stone, perhaps the deep, starry blue of lapis from the Far East, or the cool, veined green of malachite. And there was glass. Not the clear, perfect glass we know, but glass paste, a vibrant, opaque, jewel-like material made of fused sand and pigment, which could be cut into tiny, glittering tesserae. These were the details that would hold the pilgrim's eye. They would be used to create the intricate mythological scenes that adorned the throne. The tiny, perfect flowers on the hem of the robe, the glittering clasp on the god's shoulder, and most important of all, the eyes. The eyes of a god cannot be ivory. They must see. They must be inlaid with these stones, with this glass, with materials that would catch the single golden shaft of light from the temple doors. In the deep, sacred gloom, these tiny, polished points would be the only sharp, bright things. They would gleam, a tiny knowing spark of life, a hint of the terrible, intelligent mind awake and waiting within the silent, colossal form. The sounds of the workshop, which had been the gentle scritch of ivory and the patient shk of polishing, now they changed. A new sound joined the symphony, a sound of fire and force. From the courtyard forge, a place of intense, shimmering heat, came the rhythmic, percussive ring, ring, ring of hammer on metal. This was not the gentle tap of the chisel. This was the heavy, formative blow. This was the sound of the god's garments being born from raw, stubborn ingots. The air itself grew heavier, hotter, filled with the sharp, metallic tang of hot gold, the acrid, sulphurous bite of the charcoal fire, and the sudden, violent hiss of steam as a piece of glowing metal was quenched, the sound like a dragon's sigh, sending a plume of white vapour into the dusty air. The gold beaters, their arms thick with muscle, their faces slick with sweat and soot, worked in a hypnotic, pounding rhythm, their hammers rising and falling, transforming the dense, heavy metal, beating it, thinning it, stretching it, turning a king's ransom into plates as thin and flexible as hide, plates that would become the hymation, the drapery of the divine. This was a work of alchemy, taking the heaviest of metals and making it appear light, making it seem to flow like water, to ripple like silk in a breeze. Once the plates were hammered into their rough, curved shapes, guided by the terracotta moulds, the fine work began. The sound of the heavy hammer was replaced by a new set, a collection of much smaller, sharper, more precise sounds. The tink, tink, tink of 100 tiny chisels, the fine metallic scratch of the engraver's burin. This was the chasing, the art of drawing on metal. For the robes of Zeus were not to be plain. They were not just a vast, blank expanse of shining gold. No, they were to be a story, a garden of the gods etched into the metal skin. Phidias, or his most trusted masters, took up their tools, and with a jeweller's focus began to press and carve into the cool, finished surface, and from the gold life emerged. There was the soft, repeating pattern of lilies, their petals unfurling, their forms so delicate you could almost smell their faint, sweet perfume on the metallic air. And among the flowers, animals, small, perfect creatures, perhaps an eagle, the god's own messenger, its feathers chased with such precision they seemed to rustle, or a resting lion, its mane a complex cascade of 1,000 tiny hammered lines. Each detail was a whisper, a testament to the god's dominion over the living world, a soft, intricate story told on a canvas of pure, hard gold. And then the assembly, the great, shadowy wooden soul of the god, waited in the gloom of the practice cellar. It was a mountain of timber, a colossal rough-hewn man-shape, smelling deeply of pine resin and cedar, its surface planed smooth, waiting for its precious skin. One by one the finished pieces were brought from the forge, from the chaser's bench. The massive curved plates of the god's robes, the vast detailed sections for the shoulders, the knees, the chest, each one carried by several men, the gold thrumming softly with the movement, its polished surface capturing the dim workshop light and turning it into a river of liquid, buttery yellow. This was the most delicate of dances. These plates, worth a fortune, thin as they were still heavy. They had to be lifted, high up on the scaffolding that spiderwebbed the wooden core. They had to be fitted. You would have heard the quiet, muttered commands, the groan of the ropes, and then the soft, resonant clack as a plate of gold was settled against the seasoned wood. Each piece was designed to overlap its neighbour perfectly, like the scales of a divine serpent, leaving no seam, no hint of the human mortal joinery beneath. And then the final sound, the click, click, click of the fasteners, small precious nails of gold or gilded bronze, driven through the metal and into the wood, each one a tiny secure anchor, stitching the god's golden skin to his wooden bones, making him whole. The sheer scale of it, the logistics, it is enough to numb the mind. We think of Phidias, the solitary artist, his hand on the chisel, but this was not art. This was industry. This was a vast, sprawling, complex machine, and Phidias was its chief engineer. Think of the weight, not just of the gold, which was measured in talents, a weight so vast it was a measure of national wealth, but the ivory, an estimated 50 adult elephants, perhaps more, hunted and harvested, their tusks transported across the dangerous wine-dark sea, dragged on carts up the dusty road to Olympia. Think of the money, the staggering cost, the endless accounts, the ledgers kept by meticulous scribes, their styluses scratching on wax tablets, the clink of coins in the paymaster's chest, the smell of ink and papyrus. Think of the people. This was not one man. This was an army, hundreds of artisans, not just the sculptors, but the carpenters, the wood carvers, the smiths at the forge, the gold beaters, the ivory workers with their secret, acrid-smelling techniques, the mould makers in the clay pits, the painters, the gilders, the carriers of water, the sharpeners of tools. It was a city of making, all focused on this one dim, dusty room, Phidias did not just sculpt a god, he managed its creation. He had to coordinate the flow of materials, the schedules of the workers, the quality of every single tiny lily. He was a master of supply chains, of human resources, of awe itself. It was the greatest, most complex artistic project the world had ever seen. A miracle of logistics disguised as a miracle of faith. And yet, the glory of the god's own body, his ivory flesh, his golden garments, these were only half of the vision. The other half was his foundation, the structure that held him, the throne itself. As vast as the god was, his chair was a landscape, a monument in its own right, a work of art so rich, so complex, that one could spend an entire lifetime studying its surfaces and still find new, unheard secrets hidden within its framework. It was the architecture of supreme power, the seat of creation, demanding reverence not just for the figure it held, but for the intricate, silent stories etched into its every curve. This throne did not merely support the god, it testified to his authority. It was a masterpiece woven from the deepest shadows and the most brilliant lights, a perfect, solemn geometry of divine control. To touch it, to sense the materials, is to understand the depth of Phidias's vision. The primary substance was the wood, but not common wood. It was ebony, the dense, heavy, darkest wood known to man, sourced from the exotic borders of the world. It smells deep and earthen, almost like spice and rich, compacted soil. Its surface, polished to a perfect cold sheen, absorbs the light, creating a profound, absolute darkness that makes the throne feel dense, immutable, and ancient. It is the colour of night, the colour of unfathomable depth, the perfect foil to the blinding, radiant skin of the god. Into this dark, rich matrix, the other materials were inlaid. Thin sheets of gold, hammered and chased, were set flush against the ebony, creating complex, glittering patterns of contrasting colour and texture. And scattered across the surface, held secure in the dark wood, were the jewels, small polished points of garnet and jasper, amber and amethyst, tiny captive stars that did not reflect the light, but focused it, gathering the deep, ambient gloom of the cellar and returning it as a tiny, sharp, multi-hued gleam. The entire structure was a mosaic of worth and depth, a dialogue between the earth's heaviest darkness and its purest light. This throne was not a quiet background. It was a library. It was the place where all the myths of the world came to rest, carved and painted and frozen into perpetual silence. Phidias covered its every surface with figures, narratives within the great, silent narrative of the god's presence. The crossbars, the feet, the stretchers, the support beams, every plane was teeming with life. Here you could trace the silent struggle of heroes, the frozen wrath of angry gods, the complex dramas of the world over which Zeus presides. The gold set into the ebony was chased with thousands of tiny figures in low relief. You can almost hear the soft internal thrum of these silent scenes. Perhaps here, carved into the armrest, is the fierce, beautiful battle of the Greeks and the Amazons, the women warriors on horseback, their bows drawn, their faces fixed in a silent, eternally poised ferocity. Every fold of their garments, every strand of their frozen hair is a masterpiece of precision, utterly dwarfed by the scale of the chair, yet holding all the drama of the mortal world. On the back of the throne there might be other, more esoteric figures, perhaps the subtle presence of the Hesperides, guarding their golden apples, or the silent, waiting forms of the Fates, weaving the thin, unbreakable threads of destiny. It is a world of figures, painted and carved, a silent, swirling tapestry of myths within the myth, all held within the supportive framework of the god's great seat, whispering that all time, all struggle, all story, ultimately rests with him, and finally, securing the immense structure rooted deep in the floor of the inner chamber, were the 4 corner posts, and at the base of each of these posts stood a figure. 4 of them, the goddesses of victory, the Nike. These were not mere decorative flourishes, they were the theological foundation of the throne itself. Each one was a small winged goddess carved with painstaking care, her robes billowing softly as if she had just landed, her wings still spread, holding the great ebony structure in a pose of eternal readiness. They are the constant physical support for the god's power. They embody the non-negotiable truth of Zeus's rule, that his will is triumph, that to be under his dominion is to be eternally victorious. They are placed at the very base, their feet grounded, their small, strong hands supporting the structure, their silent, winged forms whispering that this rule is not questioned, is not temporary, is not subject to the shifting whims of mortal fortune. It is an absolute, permanent, unassailable triumph, upheld by the very spirit of conquest. The throne, resting on the backs of these 4 silent winged witnesses, was a promise carved in ebony and gold, that the being seated upon it was not merely great, but final. It was the ultimate, unchallenged foundation of the divine order, and these 4 victories were its eternal, quiet, perfect confirmation. The long, anxious labour was over. The tools were gone, the artisans dismissed, and the dust had settled into the deep, echoing silence of the temple cellar. Now only the pilgrims remained, gathered for the moment of final revelation. The great, unseen body of the god had been covered, perhaps by a vast curtain of heavy dark linen or purple-dyed wool, weighted with lead or gilded bronze at the hem. It was a cloth that held the air, a physical boundary between the world of men and the absolute presence of the divine. And then the moment arrived. There was no fanfare, no trumpet blast to pierce the sacred quiet, only the slow, deliberate action of the attendants pulling upon the ropes. A soft, heavy began, a whisper of fabric against fabric, a sound that grew into a sustained, low whoosh as the colossal curtain began its slow, inevitable descent. It did not fall instantly, but rather seemed to melt, peeling away from the structure, absorbing the last traces of light before yielding to the form it had concealed. And in that moment, the silence was broken, not by noise, but by a physical, internal shock. The light that had been held captive by the cloth was released. The gold, the tons of hammered, polished chrysos, caught the dim, angular light filtering through the great bronze doors, and it did not simply reflect it. It seemed to generate it. A flare of radiant, buttery yellow exploded in the gloom, so sudden, so vast, that the eyes of the first visitors instinctively watered, their vision momentarily blinded by the sheer, unearthly gleam. The air changed again, no longer just cool stone and distant incense, but now filled with the warm, complex aroma of the finished god, the faint, clean scent of the oil used to preserve the ivory, mingling with the heavy, musky smell of the cedarwood core and the lingering metallic tang of the gold. But the most immediate, profound reaction was the sound. A sudden, absolute, deafening silence. A collective gasp, choked instantly into a held breath. The murmurs of the crowd ceased entirely, replaced by the sound of hearts beating, the blood rushing in the ears, the profound, resonant quiet that follows the sight of something truly impossible. Knees weakened, heads bowed, not in voluntary reverence, but in an involuntary, physical submission to the scale and the light. The god was solid, he was present, he was seated, yet he dominated all of existence. And it was the sheer impossibility of that seated posture that gave rise to the quiet, terrifying thought that would follow the pilgrims out of the temple and echo down the centuries. The whisper passed from one trembling pilgrim to the next, often only heard upon the wind long after the sight had been witnessed, was this: if he stood up, he would unroof the temple. This was the final, terrifying truth of Phidias's art. The god was so vast, his shoulders so wide, his head crowned with the olive wreath, so close to the high, distant ceiling of the cellar, that his very composure was a miracle of restraint. The seated position was not one of rest, it was one of containment. It was the absolute submission of unimaginable power to the bounds of the sacred architecture built for his honor. The massive wooden armature, the heavy ivory, the tons of gold. The entire structure seemed to be pushing against the ceiling, filling the sacred volume to capacity, creating an oppressive sense of divine pressure. His presence was a weight on the air, an invisible force that pressed the beholder down to the ground. You look upon his face, the ivory smooth and calm, his eyes inlaid with polished stones that seem to look through you with an expression of infinite quiet authority, and you realize that the most powerful thing about him is the decision to remain seated. This sight, this was the feeling of being made small. It was a cleansing, terrible awe that stripped away the petty arrogance of the mortal world. You stood there, a single speck of dust on the cool, worn marble floor, and you were made profoundly, absolutely aware of your own scale. The massive, beautiful feet of the god, carved from ivory, resting upon a footstool carved with further, intricate scenes, were still impossibly far above your head. The sound of the small, steady drip, drip, drip of the olive oil from the protective basin at the god's feet, a necessary maintenance to preserve the delicate ivory from the dry air, was the only small rhythmic sound in the whole immense space, a tiny, humble testament to the fragility of even the divine skin. But the feeling was not one of despair, it was one of order. Before this colossal silent presence, every question, every worry, every ambition of the small human heart seemed to fade into insignificance. The god was real. He was here. He was seated, quiet, and eternally powerful. You were small, but you were finally, undeniably, standing in the presence of the Absolute. The feeling was of being utterly anchored, utterly witnessed, and utterly humbled by a single, impossible, beautiful truth. The arduous labour was done. The last plate of gold was fixed, the final slice of ivory set into the colossal face, the last jewel pressed into the dark. Exotic ebony of the throne. The mortal work of Phidias was finished, and yet the master remained. Long after the sound of the hammers and the whispers of the artisans had vanished, he stood alone in the terrifying, resonant quiet of the temple cellar. The single oil lamp he carried cast colossal, dancing shadows of the seated god, making him appear to move, to breathe, to look down upon the tiny human figure at his feet. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of the ritual oil, the smoky tang of incense, and the faint, dry mineral smell of the polished stone. It was a moment of profound, cold solitude. He had built the most beautiful body the world would ever see, but he had to know, had the soul arrived? Was this a statue, or was it a god's dwelling? And so, in that heavy, expectant darkness, Phidias performed his final, silent ritual. He stood upon the cool, unforgiving marble floor, his gaze fixed upward, following the smooth, shining contours of the ivory, past the enormous knees, past the robes of gold that shimmered faintly in the weak lamplight, all the way up to the impassive, perfect face of the Father of Gods. His voice, usually so calm and precise, was now barely a thread of sound, a reverent, pleading whisper, utterly swallowed by the immense cold volume of the space. He offered up the silent creation of his hands to the sky he could not see. He asked for a sign, a confirmation. He asked Zeus, the thunderer, to acknowledge the seat prepared for him. He asked, not with the arrogance of a creator, but with the fearful humility of a servant, yearning only to know that his long, exhausting work had not been in vain. And then the world outside, the world of silent stones and sleeping groves, answered him. It began far away, a low, ominous thrum, a sound felt more than heard, a vibration that seemed to travel not through the air, but up through the very bedrock of the earth. It was a deep, subsonic rumble that grew not in sudden bursts, but in slow, inexorable waves. The sky, sensing the appeal, began to speak. The sound was not muffled by the thick stone walls of the temple. It seemed rather to enter them, to penetrate the very structure. The massive marble blocks of the floor, the towering columns, the immense coffered ceiling, they all began to hum, to vibrate with the gathering storm. The temple itself was transformed into a colossal sounding vessel, an amplifier for the anger and the power of the sky. The sound built to a crescendo, a roaring, continuous volume that pressed against the eardrums and felt like a physical weight on the chest, an auditory declaration of absolute, inescapable might. It was the voice of Zeus, heavy and unquestionable, rolling through the cellar and shaking the golden garments of the seated god. And then came the sign, a sudden, stark, unnatural flash of light, not the warm, flickering gold of the lamplight, but a blinding, stark white that filled the entire space, overwhelming the ivory and the gold, making them seem momentarily transparent. And with it, the terrifying, splitting crack of the thunderbolt, a sound so immediate and violent that it sounded like the very fabric of the air had been torn in two. The power did not strike the statue itself, but its divine aim was perfect. The legend whispers that the lightning plunged down through the vast open space of the temple roof, striking the pavement just before the statue, or perhaps on the very first step of the colossal black pedestal. The crash was followed by a sudden, acrid smell, the sharp, metallic scent of ozone, burnt earth, and fractured stone. When the light receded and the profound, ringing echo of the sound had finally vanished, a scar remained, a single, small, scorched mark on the pavement, a testament to the brief, terrifying touch of the raw electric power of the heavens. It was the god's own seal. The storm moved on, leaving only the sound of a soft, steady rain outside, washing the dust from the marble. And Phidias stood there, his body trembling, not from fear, but from a profound, overwhelming sense of absolute confirmation. The work was accepted. The human had finished his task, and the divine had claimed the result. The statue was no longer mere ivory and gold. It was a consecrated dwelling, imbued with the terrible, gentle, life-giving presence of the Thunderer. A sense of immense final peace descended upon the master, replacing the heavy burden of doubt. He knew with a certainty that resonated deep within his bones that when pilgrims now entered the cellar, they would not just see the greatest work of art ever conceived. They would see the God. The creation of man had been approved by the deity himself. The seated colossal figure, quiet and absolute, was now eternally and truly the Lord of Olympia. The God was complete. He had been accepted by the thunder. His presence filled the vast cold silence of the cellar, and the awe he inspired was absolute. But a god made by mortal hands of mortal materials is subject to the slow, creeping, patient decay of the mortal world. The genius of Phidias was not just in the creation, it was in the preservation. He knew the enemy was not fire nor invasion, but the very air of Olympia itself. You must remember where the temple stood, in a sacred grove, yes, but a grove nestled between two rivers, the Alpheus and the Cladios. It was a place of soft earth, river mists, and heavy humid air, the air that rose from the marshy ground, the air that smelled of wet stone and green living decay, was a poison to the god's delicate skin. The chryselephantine technique was a miracle, but a fragile one. The wooden core of the statue would swell in the dampness, and the ivory would suffer. Ivory is organic, it is tooth, it is bone, and in the relentless moist air of the grove it would absorb the humidity. It would begin to soften, to warp, and then, the most terrible fate, it would crack. God's perfect, serene face would be undone by a spiderweb of fine, dark lines. His skin, a testament to divine life, would begin to peel. The damp was a silent, patient enemy, waiting to reclaim the divine flesh. Phidias, the master of materials, knew this, and so he devised a solution, a ritual as sacred and as constant as the sacrifices at the great altar. The solution came from the other sacred tree of the grove, the olive. The god's skin would be anointed eternally with a constant loving coating of pure golden olive oil. This was not a hurried, practical task. It was a slow, meditative, endless ceremony. Attendants would move with silent, practiced grace, dipping soft, fine linen cloths into bronze vessels. You can almost hear the quiet, viscous glug of the oil being poured from an amphora, a thick, slow, golden stream. You can almost smell the rich, fruity, earthy scent of the fresh oil as it was prepared. And then the sound of the ritual itself, a soft, almost imperceptible shh, a gentle, polishing sound as the saturated cloth was drawn again and again over the vast, cool, smooth surfaces of the ivory. The oil was a shield. It filled the microscopic, invisible pores of the ivory, creating a barrier that was impervious to the damp. It repelled the moisture in the air, but it did more than that. It fed the ivory. It kept it supple. It gave the skin a deep, warm, living glow, a soft luster that no polish or stone could ever replicate. It made the god appear to be eternally, softly breathing. This sacred, intimate duty, this task of touching the god, was not given to just any priest. It was a hereditary honor, a secret passed from father to son, from mother to daughter. It was entrusted to the family of Phidias himself. They were known as the Phidias, the polishers, the brighteners, a name that sounds so humble, yet describes the most awesome of responsibilities. Imagine what it must have been to be a descendant of the Master and to know that your life's purpose was to preserve his, to be the one to ascend the tall wooden scaffolding in the deep, silent gloom of the temple in the cold hours before dawn, to stand inches from the colossal divine face, to feel the sheer scale of the head, the vast calm planes of the cheek, the gentle curve of the eyelid, and then to reach out your own small, warm, mortal hand and to touch the god, to anoint him, to rub the cool, fragrant oil into his skin, your own reflection captured for a moment in the gleaming surface before you polished it away. The scent of the oil would be on your hands, in your clothes, in your hair. It was the smell of your bloodline, the perfume of your sacred trust. And so, this endless ritual created the final, unforgettable sensory signature of the temple. The cellar did not smell like a cold stone building. It smelled alive. It was a complex, layered, and utterly unique perfume. As you stepped from the bright, sun-baked air into the deep, cool darkness, the scent would envelop you, thick and heavy. It was first the deep, warm, nutty scent of old olive oil, not the sharp scent of a new pressing, but the rich, complex, resinous smell of decades, of centuries, of oil that had seeped into the very stone of the floor, into the vast wooden beams of the ceiling, into the air itself. It was the scent of preservation, a smell of ancient earthy warmth, and blending with this heavy foundational note was the sharp, bright, spiritual tang of incense, the sweet, smoky perfume of frankincense and myrrh burned daily on the altars, a scent that spoke of prayer, of the heavens, of the spirit. The smoke would rise, a thin blue-grey whisper clinging to the golden robes, while the heavy scent of the oil anchored the god to the earth. This was the air that Zeus breathed. It was the scent of the body and the soul, of human care and divine presence, a perfect, sacred, aromatic balance that, once breathed, would haunt the memory forever. The soft, persistent drip, drip, drip of the oil onto the floor was not merely a maintenance sound. It was the rhythmic pulse of the god's eternal health, and it drew the eye to one final, astonishing feature of the temple cellar, positioned directly at the feet of the colossal, seated Zeus. This was the basin, the collecting point for the sacred olive oil, and it was a masterpiece of architectural deception. It was a shallow, rectangular pit, framed and lined with a material of profound, absolute darkness, black Eleusinian marble. This stone, renowned for its deep, starless hue and its flawless ability to absorb light, was polished to such a high sheen that when the basin was filled with the collected olive oil, the surface became not liquid, but a sheet of pure dark glass. It was a pool of solidified night, a horizontal portal of shadow that seemed to drink the very air around it. This pool was far more than a mere catch basin for the precious unguent. It was the final, ingenious element of the sculpture's atmosphere, the last subtle stroke of Phidias's total vision. This black reservoir, though born of pure necessity, the need to preserve the ivory skin from the harsh river humidity, was transformed by the master's touch into a deliberate central component of the worship experience. It was not just for maintenance, it was for atmosphere. The thick layer of oil on the surface, still and dark, ensured that the material within the basin would not simply look like water, which would ripple and break the illusion, but would become a perfect, unwavering mirror. This was the quiet, constant genius of Phidias, understanding that every detail, however practical, must contribute to the religious awe. The black marble of the base was chosen specifically because it maximized the reflective contrast. The dark pool acted as a bottomless canvas, a sheet of perpetual night positioned precisely to catch and hold the brilliant radiance emanating from the gods. Above, the scent of the temple, that heavy, warm perfume of old oil and sharp incense, was concentrated here, rising from this still, dark surface like a breath from the earth itself. The effect of this dark reflection was immediate, profound, and utterly hypnotic. As the pilgrims stood before the colossal figure, their senses overwhelmed by the gold and the ivory, their gaze would eventually fall, and there, at their feet in that pool of black liquid shadow, they would see not one god, but two. The pure, dark surface of the oil doubled the statue's aura, creating a mirrored image that was both perfectly visible and entirely submerged. The reflection was not stark and cold, it was warm, flickering, and suggestive, catching the polished gold of the drapery and turning it into a river of undulating light that seemed to flow down into the earth. The massive ivory feet were perfectly inverted, creating a sense of terrifying depth. It suggested that the god did not merely sit upon a throne, but was rooted in the very core of the world, his power extending beneath the floor into an infinite void. This doubling enhanced the scale, transforming the statue from a finite visible object into an infinite metaphysical presence. The pool created a visual echo, confirming the statue's existence in both the physical world and a silent, shadowy realm beneath. The god felt impossibly vast, rooted below the surface of the earth and contained only by the confines of the temple roof. This terrifying doubled presence, this perfect synergy between human artistry and divine scale, achieved its ultimate success in the reaction it evoked from the most sophisticated, most experienced observers of the ancient world. Among those who stood humbled before the sight was Aemilius Paulus, the Roman general, the conqueror of Macedon, a man utterly accustomed to the weight of power and the spectacle of worldly triumph. He was not a superstitious pilgrim, but a statesman, a hardened soldier, and a man of sober intellect. He had seen empires fall. He had stood before all the great treasures of the Greek world. Yet, when he entered the gloom of the cellar and gazed upon the mirrored image of the seated god, his reaction was not merely admiration for the artistry of Phidias. It was the deepest, most spiritual awe. His recorded words, whispered and carried by chroniclers, became the final, ultimate validation of the statue's power. He was utterly overcome, admitting that he felt as if he had beheld Jupiter's very self. This was the sublime, perfect success of the chryselephantine technique, the mirror and the scale. The man who had conquered kings was conquered by the image of the divine. He did not see gold and ivory. He did not see Phidias's genius. He saw the deity. He witnessed not a representation, but a presence. The reflection in the black oil, the terrifying closeness of the colossal ivory face, the sheer, crushing weight of the god's contained power, it all coalesced to create a moment of genuine, sacred encounter. The quiet, reverent awe of the world could not last forever. The scent of the sacred grove, that ancient, peaceful perfume of olive oil and damp earth, was soon to be choked by a new, hotter, drier wind, a wind from the west, a wind that smelled of iron, of sun-baked stone, and of power. Rome, the old reverence, the quiet awe of men like Aemilius Paulus, had curdled over the centuries. The world no longer knelt in wonder, it sought to possess. The whispers in the cellar were no longer the soft, sibilant Greek of awestruck pilgrims, but the hard, clipped, purposeful Latin of soldiers and governors. The god, seated in his perfect, silent, oily gloom, was no longer just a deity to be worshipped. He was an object, the greatest prize in a conquered world, and a new, terrible human hubris was rising, a hubris that did not fear the thunder. This arrogance found its perfect, terrifying vessel in a single man, an emperor who believed himself to be not just a ruler, but a destination. Caligula, a name whispered not with reverence, but with a cold, sharp dread. From his sprawling, opulent palace on the Palatine Hill, a place of suffocating, unnatural quiet, broken only by the sudden, sharp commands of a paranoid mind, he looked upon the world as his collection, and he wanted the centerpiece. He conceived of an act of sacrilege so profound, so utterly arrogant, it chilled the hearts of even his own hardened courtiers. The order was given, a thin, reedy voice in a marble room, a room that smelled of exotic, heavy perfumes and the faint, sour tang of stale wine. His men were to go to Olympia. They were not to pillage. They were not to destroy. They were to move the god. And more than that, they were to decapitate him. The plan was to have the colossal ivory head, the serene, ancient face of Zeus, carefully disassembled, piece by precious numbered piece, and shipped to Rome. And there, in its place, a new head would be fashioned, of gold and ivory, in the perfect mortal likeness of Caligula himself. He would become the god. The work began. The emperor's men, his engineers, his factotums, arrived at Olympia. They were practical Roman men, their minds filled with calculations of weight and balance, their hearts empty of the old fear. They strode into the cellar, their hobnailed sandals clacking loudly on the worn, sacred stone, a sound of pure, ringing disrespect in the ancient, hallowed quiet. They unrolled their papyrus scrolls upon the black, reflective oil pool at the god's feet, the dry crackle of the parchment echoing like a snapped twig. They stood there, pointing, measuring, discussing the logistics of the divine dismemberment, and as they planned, as their voices, too loud, too practical, bounced off the ivory skin of the god, the temple answered. It began as a low, deep vibration, a sound that came not from the air, but from the very bones of the god himself, from the air. Colossal, unseen wooden armature deep within. It was the sound of 1,000-year-old timber, a sound like a great ship groaning in a deep sea, and this low, resonant groan grew, and it set the thin golden plates of the god's robes shivering, a high, metallic, chattering sound like a billion tiny brass insects, a sound that built and built until the low groan and the high chatter combined, and the wooden core gave a sudden explosive crack, a percussive, booming report that sounded like laughter. It was a vast, hollow, booming, maniacal sound, a single, echoing peal of divine mockery that shook the dust from the ceiling. The Roman engineers, their faces as pale as the ivory, the smell of their own cold, sudden sweat, sharp in the air, did not wait. They fled, their scrolls left behind, scattering like dry leaves before the god's terrible structural mirth. But the fear of a god is one thing. The fear of a mad emperor is another. The order was absolute, and so new men were sent, or the old ones were forced to return. This time they would not be deterred. They began to build. The scent of fresh-cut, resinous pine and the dusty, fibrous smell of new rope filled the cellar, a scent of construction that was a profound desecration. A vast, complex network of Roman scaffolding was erected, its wooden feet scraping and gouging the sacred polished floor. The structure rose, a cage of timber, eclipsing the god, blocking the light, its cross beams throwing a spider's web of new, profane shadows on the ivory face. The first workers, their tools hanging from their belts, the metallic clink of bronze on bronze echoing nervously, placed their feet on the ladders. They began to climb, and as the first man reached the level of the god's vast golden lap, as he reached out a trembling mortal hand to touch the divine knee, the god judged. With no tremor, no storm, no sound from the sky, the scaffolding imploded. There was a sudden, sickening collective sound of 1,000 splinters, the sound of dozens of massive, weight-bearing beams snapping at once, a sound like the breaking of a forest. The entire intricate structure, a testament to Roman engineering, simply failed. It collapsed in on itself, a chaotic, violent, screaming avalanche of timber, rope and men, crashing down onto the black, reflective pool, shattering the god's dark mirror into 1,000 oil-slicked pieces. And when the dust, thick and choking, finally began to settle, the god sat, untouched, unmoved. His serene ivory face looked down, impassive, upon the wreckage of human arrogance. He had protected himself. He had made his will known. He would not be moved. But the arrogance of an emperor was a sudden storm, a thing of noise and fleeting violence, the true end, the long fade. It was not a thunderclap, it was a change in the wind, a slow, quiet, creeping chill that came not from Rome's paranoia, but from its conversion. A new story was being whispered, a story from the East. It told of a different God, a single, unseen God, a God of humility and sacrifice. And this new faith, it did not marvel at the old gods. It feared them. It called them hollow. It called them demons. The sound of this new faith was not the deep, chaotic, joyful roar of the festival crowd. It was a thinner sound, the sound of a single, clear, metallic bell ringing out over the olive groves, the scent of the sacred, which had for a millennium been the rich, complex perfume of roasting meat, spilled wine, and earthy olive oil, was slowly, subtly replaced. The new scent was the sharp, spiritual smell of wax. The scent of 1,000 tiny flickering candles and a different kind of incense, drier, sweeter, less opulent. This new faith did not need a 40-foot statue of ivory and gold. It needed only a book and a cross and a human heart. And so the heart of the grove began to slow. The new faith, rising in the halls of power in Rome and Constantinople, looked upon Olympia with suspicion. The games, the naked bodies, the celebration of human perfection, the sacrifices to a pantheon of silent golden figures, these were not just traditions, they were abominations. The edict came, carried on the wind, a whisper from an emperor, Theodosius I. The year was 393. The Olympic Games, the pulse of the Hellenic world for more than 1,000 years, were banned. And with that single scratched line of ink, the lifeblood of Olympia was cut. The next summer, the great stadium, built to hold 40,000 screaming, joyful voices, was silent. Imagine that silence. The palestra, the gymnasium, no sound of running feet on the packed, oiled earth, no thwack of the discus, no grunt of the wrestlers, no shouts of the trainers. The only sound was the wind, a lonely hollow whoosh running its own invisible race down the empty track. The hippodrome no longer smelled of horses and sweat and the sharp metallic tang of adrenaline. It smelled only of damp grass, of weeds already beginning to claim the starting blocks, their thin, green fingers pushing up through the cracks in the stone. The pilgrims' inns, the Katagogia, were shuttered. Their fires were cold, their hearths filled with the smell of old grey ash and rainwater. And the temple, the great, magnificent house of the god, it fell silent too. The pilgrims stopped coming. The vast bronze doors, which had opened every morning to a flood of light and awestruck whispers, now remained closed. Perhaps they were barred from the outside, a heavy wooden beam laid across their handles, or perhaps they were simply left, abandoned, to swing and groan on their massive, unoiled hinges, moved only by the force of the winter gales. The wind, which had once been a muffled, distant shh outside the walls, was now an occupant. It whistled and moaned in the high, dark colonnades. It found its way through the cracks in the marble tiles of the roof, and the sound of that wind echoing in the vast, empty cellar was the only voice left to speak to the god. Dust, which had been kept in constant motion by the shuffling feet of thousands, now began its slow, patient final conquest. A fine, grey, velvety layer settled upon the polished marble floor. It gathered on the dark, rich ebony of the throne. It settled on the golden, unmoving knees of the god. The only sound besides the wind was the steady, cold drip, drip, drip of rainwater finding a new path, falling from the unseen ceiling, a tiny, percussive sound echoing in the darkness, striking the dusty floor over and over, a sound like a clock, measuring the long, slow, empty hours. And this was the final quiet tragedy. The oil was no longer applied. The keepers, the Phydrin Tai, the descendants of Phidias, they were gone. Their sacred hereditary duty to touch the god to preserve his skin, it was over. Perhaps the last one died of old age, with no son or daughter to teach the secret. Or perhaps, more likely, he was forbidden, driven out by the new priests in their dark robes, his ancient knowledge now deemed a form of pagan witchcraft. The black, reflecting pool at the god's feet, once so full, was now just a dry, cracked, dusty pit of black marble. The air in the temple, it changed. The heavy, warm, nutty scent of the olive oil, it began to fade. Day by day, week by week, it grew thinner until it was just a memory, a faint, resinous ghost in the air. And in its place came new smells, the sharp, sour scent of mildew, the smell of damp, slowly rotting wood, the great, unseen wooden soul of the god, finally exposed to the river's humidity, and the smell of dust, a thick, choking, ancient mineral smell of absolute neglect, and the god's skin, his ivory flesh, it felt the change. Alone in the dark, with no one to anoint him, the god began to thirst. The damp, hostile air, once held at bay, now began its slow, relentless assault. The ivory, drying and swelling, began to tick. A faint, almost inaudible sound, the sound of 1,000 microscopic tensions releasing, and then the first crack. A thin, dark line, a spider's web appearing on the serene, smooth, divine cheek. A tear carved by time and neglect. The god was left alone in the cold and the damp and the dark, to slowly, silently come undone. The god sat in his cold, damp, silent darkness. The spiders, who did not fear him, spun their thin grey webs in the folds of his golden robes. The dust, thick and undisturbed, muted the deep, rich black of the ebony throne. His perfect ivory skin, unoiled, untouched, was a mosaic of fine, dark, thirsty cracks. And then he was gone. He vanished. The temple, already a tomb, became an absence. The colossal 40-foot void where the god should have been was now a scream of emptiness, louder than any thunderclap, and in this final, aching silence the last confused whispers began. What happened? What final, terrible fate could erase a thing so vast, so loved, so real? The end of the god is a story with two paths, a mystery of two fires. The first path, the first fire, is a story of judgment, a fire of purpose. This theory whispers that the god never left his home. He remained in his temple until the new faith, grown bold, could no longer tolerate his silent golden presence. This was the time of Theodosius II. An order was given, perhaps in the year 426, a final cleansing act. The doors of the temple were not just barred, they were broken open, and the men who entered this time did not come with the awe of pilgrims or the greed of emperors. They came with the cold, hard fury of iconoclasts. They came with torches, and the temple, the house of the god, was to become his pyre. The air, which for a millennium had smelled of oil and incense, was now choked with a new, sharp, acrid scent. The smell of pitch, of dry kindling piled at the god's feet. The sound was not the roar of a storm, but the sharp, hungry crackle of the first flames, a sound of teeth biting into the dry, sacred, 1,000-year-old wood of the throne. The fire found the god's unseen wooden soul. The ancient oil-soaked timber, dry and brittle from neglect, did not just burn, it detonated. A column of fire roared up through the god's core, and the statue, for one last terrible moment, glowed. It was lit from within. The ivory skin, now superheated, began to shriek, a high, thin whistling sound as the moisture inside it flashed to steam. The plates of gold, his beautiful chaste robes, rippled, and then they slumped. They melted, dripping in thick, golden, weeping streams onto the marble floor. The smell was the smell of the end of an age, the perfume of burning ebony, the sickening biological smell of incinerated ivory, of burning bone, and the final choking black smoke of a god being executed. But there is another whisper, a second path. This path says the god did not meet his end in the grove. It says that he was saved, or perhaps stolen, that before the final destruction in the chaotic years of the dying empire, he was seen as the ultimate prize. This theory has him moved, carefully, secretly, disassembled piece by precious numbered piece, his golden robes pried from their wooden core, his ivory flesh packed in straw, and shipped on a vast silent cargo ship across the sea, his destination Constantinople, the new Rome, the greatest, richest, most powerful city in the world. But he was not brought there to be worshipped. He was brought there to be owned. He was reassembled not in a temple, but in a palace, the vast opulent marble hall of a man named Lausus, the emperor's chief chamberlain, a eunuch of unimaginable wealth. And here the god's fate was, perhaps, even sadder. He was an exhibit. He was placed in a vast hall, a museum of dead deities surrounded by other silent captive gods, the Athena of Lindos, the Hera of Samos, the Aphrodite of Cnidos. The air here was not the damp, sacred air of Olympia. It was dry, sterile, and smelled of polished marble, exotic silk hangings, and the faint, dusty perfume of a rich man's collection. He was no longer a god. He was a thing, the ultimate priceless conversation piece, his divine ivory face stared at over wine cups by courtiers who saw not a god but art. And it was here in this city of silks and marble that the god met the second fire. It was not the purposeful holy fire of the zealot. It was a different fire altogether, a city fire, a stupid, chaotic, mortal fire born of accident and wind, the great fire of Lauseon in the year 475. It began in a marketplace or a bakery, a spark, a breath of wind, a forgotten ember, and it grew. It became an inferno, a roaring, indiscriminate beast that leaped from roof to roof, a wall of sound and heat. The smell was not of a god, but of a world burning, the smoke of burning homes, of fabrics, of spices, of plaster, of people. The palace of Lausus, for all its marble, was in the path. The fire found the hall of statues. The sound was the crash of the roof falling in, the shattering of marble, the hiss of 1,000 fires extinguished and 1,000 more born, and the god of Olympia, the creation of Phidias, the wonder of the world, he just burned. He was just flammable, the dry, ancient wooden core, the delicate, brittle ivory, the golden robes. They were consumed not in a sacred ritual, but as fuel. He was devoured by a meaningless mortal blaze, his melting gold pooling with the lead from the roofs, his ashes mingling with the ashes of 1,000 ordinary homes, a final, anonymous and terrible end, a god consumed by flames, his last whisper, a puff of smoke, lost in the howling red wind, and so the fires, whether of zealotry or of accident, they burned themselves out, the smoke, thick with the ashes of a god, cleared. The centuries, like a slow, patient tide, began to wash over the grove. And what is left for us? What remains now if we were to walk that sacred path past the silent, sleeping olive trees? We would find an absence. We would step out into the bright, hot Hellenic sun, a sun that beats down with a dry, relentless heat, and we would find the foundations. The temple is gone, its columns toppled, its roof open to the sky. All that remains is a footprint, a vast rectangular scar of stone upon the earth, the crepidoma and the stylobate, now cracked and weathered. You can stand there in the very centre of the cellar, in the exact spot where the god once sat. You can feel the sun bake your skin, a heat the god never felt. You can smell the sharp green herbal scent of wild thyme and oregano crushed under your feet, a perfume of the mortal earth. You can hear the high electric shimmering zzz of the cicadas in the nearby pines, a sound of pure indifferent summer heat. And you can look down and see the faint dark stain, the outline of the black marble pool, a dry dusty memory of the mirror that once held a god's reflection. It is an emptiness so profound, so defined, that you can still feel the shape of the awe that once filled this space. But there is something more, a tangible echo. If you walk just to the west, you can find the foundations of the ergastarian, the workshop, and it was here, buried in the dark, damp earth, sleeping for a millennium, that the proof was found, not the god, but the making of the god. The small human things, the iron tools now rusted into dark, pitted lace-like shapes, their sharp working edges long since eaten by the earth. The small terracotta moulds, the hollow earthy wombs that once gave shape to the god's golden robes, now just broken, curved shards, still holding the faint, graceful lines of Phidias's hand. And the cup, the simple, dark, humble clay cup found amongst the chisels and the scraps, the one that holds the three simple, scratched Greek words, Phideu Ami. I belong to Phidias. To hold it, or to see it, is to feel a sudden, sharp, impossible connection. You can feel the cool, rough texture of the fired clay. You can smell the faint, dry, ancient scent of the earth it slept in. This small, mortal object, this survived. The colossal god of ivory and gold, a wonder of the world, vanished into smoke. And this simple human cup, which held a man's water or wine, remains. It is the last physical, intimate whisper of the man who touched the divine. The statue itself, it is gone, utterly. Not a sliver of the ivory, not a single melted tear of the gold has ever been found. It has evaporated from the world of things, but the memory of the wonder, that is what truly survived. It survived in the scattered tiny images stamped onto old worn coins, a crude miniature ghost of the god's great seated majesty. It survived in the dry, meticulous, precious words of the travellers, the careful descriptions of Pausanias, who walked this very spot and measured and looked and wrote. It survived in the awestruck whispers of men like Aemilius Paulus, whose soul was moved, whose testimony to the god's presence became a story told for 1,000 years. The wonder, you see, was never just the gold or the ivory or the sheer impossible scale. The wonder was the feeling of being small, the feeling of being seen by an infinite calm authority, the feeling of standing in the presence of Jupiter's very self. And that feeling was so powerful, it became a story that could not be burned or banned or buried. And so the statue lives on. It lives on, not in stone or gold or any place you can touch. It lives on only in whispers. It has become a perfect, intangible, pure myth. It exists now, perhaps more powerfully than ever, in the one place it can never be destroyed, in our imagination, in the air of this library, in the quiet space between my words and your ear. We can build him again in our minds. We can smell the oil and the incense. We can feel the cold of the cellar. We can see the gleam of the gold in the darkness and the reflection in the black, still pool. The god of Olympia is gone from the world, but he will sit enthroned forever in the silent, sacred, echoing halls of our memory. And so, with the turn of a final heavy page, the great throne is empty once more, and the image of the lost god fades from our minds gently. So gently, we close the ivory cover. The sound is a soft, deep thud, a sound of finality. The story is finished. You can let it all go now. The wonder, the gold, the ancient world. Let it all dissolve into the soft, warm dark. You are safe here in the quiet of the library. There is nothing left to do but drift, nothing to see but your own comfortable dreams. If you wish to return to this place, if you feel safe in this warmth, just whisper a quiet subscribe. We will keep a candle lit for you, and a new story will be waiting on the shelf tomorrow night. But for now, it is time to sleep. Sleep, sleep. Good night.